Everyone, welcome to another edition of Founder Wisdom Podcast. Today we have Rachael Bischoff with us. She is co-founder at Sun and Sol Company, very cool new companies. We're going to discuss about filmography, about running a new agency, and jumping into the unknown, yoga, amongst other things. So, Rachael, welcome to the podcast. Can
Thank
you
you.
tell us a bit more about yourself and your company?
Yeah, of course. And thank you for having me. I am 28, so quite young, but started a company with my best friend, who is now my co-founder. We started working together at Red Bull North America in college. So we met when I think we were both around maybe 19 or 20. And then we both kind of like climbed up that like corporate ladder at Red Bull. We really succeeded there in different realms of the company. So I went into documentary films, and then Mackenzie, my co-founder, went into social media, as well as just like experiential marketing, working with opinion leaders and people of influence. And so through that, we had always just like admired each other's work from a distance because we were on a local field marketing team and then branched out into our own corporate teams in Santa Monica from Florida. And just admired each other's work from afar, didn't get to work together that often. And then as we grew older into different companies, she went to TikTok, I went to a surf brand, and then a yoga brand. We just, again, like kept finding moments where we wish we had one another in the room, working in different projects. And then one day earlier this year, we were like, why aren't we in the same room? And we decided to create Sun and Soul because we get to work upon our values and then also work with different businesses, organizations, and brands, individuals who are more aligned with our values and creating impact. So yeah, that's a little bit about it.
Nice. Well, you've participated to pretty cool documentaries, amongst others, The Fourth Phase, Distance Between Dreams, Chasing Niagara. Can you tell us about the experience to participate in one of these documentaries and what lessons you've learned out of that?
Totally. So starting out, I had zero film experience, never even thought twice about working on a film, didn't know what went into it. I had zero knowledge about production. The only thing I really knew about was like creating social content, because that's something that I did from a field marketing perspective, when like Instagram was kind of new. So it was pretty cool. And so I got approached by the director of feature films, who then became my boss at Red Bull, that basically said, hey, I'm going to be interviewing you for a role. I got it. I moved out. I started on a film called The Fourth Phase with Travis Rice, which is a snowboarding film. And I started as a production coordinator. And I felt really lucky to do that because I got to see the ins and outs of mostly post-production. So I wasn't like, they were still filming and doing pickup interviews, but the majority of the production had already been taken care of and filmed. So I learned about like a lot of post-production screenings, what goes into that, flying people out, like how to manage opinion leaders, stakeholders, partners, anything of that nature. And then I also got to see the ins and outs of production, but also marketing, sales, partnerships, what it takes to put on an event at the Shrine, and then grassroots marketing, like everything ins and outs of a film. And then it was also like one of the biggest films of the decade for snowboarding. So it was really interesting to get that experience, and then to get to work with some of people who I already like thought of as heroes. So like Travis Rice, Jimmy Chin, Jimmy's wife, Chai, like they're such powerful and influential people that just care about the earth and humans in general. And so a lot of character building going into that film. And then that translated into just working with different personalities and different stories across other projects like Distance. It was big wave surfing. That's when I really got into surfing, not big waves, but definitely started getting in the water more. I really appreciated the high performance approach that all of the athletes and individuals took to anything that they did at Red Bull, whether that was in front of the camera or behind it. So yeah, learned a lot in that role.
Yeah, and big wave surfing. I think you've worked with Alex Honnold as well. Do they take their fear-facing lessons in their respective sports and bring them to business and every project they participate in?
Um, That's interesting. So I worked with Travis closely. Alex, not so much. I worked on the Dawn Wall, so I worked with Tommy and Kevin a lot closer than I did with Alex, although he was in it. And then another film called The Alpinist with Marc-Andre Leclerc. But of all those three films, I probably work with Travis the closest. And to explain his approach to business, I think is like very unique, and it might be very different now than what it was years ago. I think it was a really important project for him. And so he was very meticulous and specific and intentional about the way in which he wanted to market it. And that included the way partners worked with him, the way things were communicated across screen, and then also just like completing the mission, explaining his health. Like a lot of these stories get so personal that I think it would be hard to compare how they conduct their business versus how they work in films, just because it's like when you're the subject matter, I think there's an entirely different level of vulnerability that goes into sharing your story versus how you would conduct yourself in a business setting. I think there's a lot of heart that Travis puts into his business, and he is always thinking of the most creative ways in which to storytell, or like to pave a certain line, or to even like get someone in the crowd involved. Like he, on every single level, he's a very intentional person. And I think that translates on screen and off.
So if you've worked with a bunch of high performance athletes, what lessons have you drawn from them and actually implemented in your business?
Yeah, they're all the most hardworking people I've ever met, and they're very dedicated to not only one thing. Like it typically is their craft, but they're multifaceted human beings. I learned a ton from Rebecca Rush in Blood Road. She is a hustler, and like in the best way, and like just like fights for everything for like the right reasons. And they take that same approach that they do in sport to their lives and their friendships. And it's so interesting to see the level of attention and care and detail that they bring into their sport and their craft. And even Paul Basagoitia, he was an athlete that I worked with that sustained a spinal cord injury. And we had a film called Any One of Us. And Paul was like, top of his game, really great when he was competing at events like Red Bull Rampage or Crankworks. And then he took that same approach that he took in mountain biking to his healing process. And then now he's like riding an e-bike. It's insane. So I think that like hard work and dedication applies to whatever it is that they're doing, and they do not give up, which is really special, because Red Bull athletes too, in specific, I've gotten to work with a lot of other athletes that work in different brands, and then also like yoga practitioners that are endorsed by different brands. That's just a whole new, like it's a whole different caliber of personality, because they work with this specific brand. So I felt super lucky to get to work with those people.
Yeah, I studied a couple of Red Bull Rampage athlete the last time we talked about it, and to me it seems that most of them have been practicing since very young age. So I can definitely see obsession in there. I can also see, sport is healthy in general. It generates a lot of nice chemicals in their brains, and they learn to kind of condition their brain to be better and better while having fun. I think passion is also the common denominator here. And last but not least, I think when we talk about Red Bull Rampage, well, I think fear is just not there anymore because, or almost non-present. They must get the jitters before performance, but the more they practice, the less they fear. And the last bit is kind of creativity, like popping these moves out of nowhere and taking huge risks also, because even if they practice, the environment is kind of new, right? When they come to the stunt place in the mountains, and they're like new obstacles. So their brain needs to kind of say, okay, I'm going to take a risk there. It might work, might not work, and I might get these points if I do. So any of that jittering made sense?
Yeah, and it's funny. I am friends with some of the people who ride and Rampage, having worked for Red Bull, and I was talking to one of them at the end of his run, and he was like, "Thank God I don't have to do that again." He was like, "I love it, but it scares the shit out of him," and that's so valid because it's insane. Like even watching makes me nervous. From especially like you can see one thing on the screen, but to see it in person, it's like, in my opinion, one of the most gnarly things Red Bull does, and so. I don't know that like fear is completely out of there. I think they see their friends get hurt, and I think it's always something that's on the table for them. But I also heard a friend say to me, once it's not enjoyable for him, he won't do it anymore. And I think that that's the most important thing. I think there's always going to be things that scare us from like going into relationship versus jumping, like hurling yourself strategically and creatively off of a cliff. And so I think like that fear aspect, they are super creative with how they manage that, and that goes into every aspect of their lives. But I definitely saw the jitters happening a lot because it's gnarly.
Yeah, for sure. Like I was about to say, they can die. I mean, most of their bodies are adapted to like gnarly impacts from falling and getting up so much time, but still, it's pretty goddamn dangerous to do what they do. Also, I think that a bunch of them are just adrenaline junkies. So it's like, the reward is way more than okay. I might fear a little bit, but the reward, the thrill is so much better than fearing that the first couple of minutes, if you want, that they're willing to do it over again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they've been doing it for so long, but even because I've also had that like think about adventure junkies as well, but I think that it means something different to them. Cause like, someone like Alex Honnold, for example, um, he feels a certain way when he climbs free solo. Like he gets that rush, he gets that like quiet, calm, like
Flow state.
attention to self, like connection with mountain and nature. Marc-Andre Leclerc was very similar, the man who was featured in The Alpinist. And so I don't know if it's necessarily an adrenaline junkie. I think that it's just how they're made and how their brains work and the things that make them feel like they're on fire and passionate and excited. Because, some of the favorite commentary that I saw across the event was talking about how stylish and creative some of the guys were as they approached their line. And I think that was one of the cooler pieces of it, was because, it's one thing to say like, wow, that was gnarly. And that's really cool. But to infuse style into it is an entirely different thing. So yeah, I think there's a really wide range of athletes and personalities that compete. And then they all either have their thing, like they're really into the big jumps, or they're really into incorporating a saran wrap into their line. Like there's so many cool things that add value to that event.
Keeping in that line of sports, you've been practicing yoga for a while. What were your reasons to become a yoga teacher, and what kind of benefits does that bring in your own life?
Totally. So I've been teaching yoga since I was 19. I'm 28 now. And I originally wanted to be a nurse in my life. I loved just like the idea of helping people. If anyone ever got like hurt or something, I would always like want to be right there. And I started to study anatomy and physiology. And then I like loved that. Like I absolutely love the way the body works and how it can connect to the mind, and how it's all one thing, how the gut influences your body and your mind. And then I started studying the chemistry piece of things, and I was like, I hate this. And so I'm not good at math. I am terrible at chemistry. I like it. I think it's really cool, but I couldn't ace a test to save my life. And I also started practicing when I was 15 because it helped me focus. I have a really difficult time focusing, and yoga and meditation is like kind of the only way that I can, without, if having to turn to other solutions or alternatives. So I started teaching when I was 19 because I found so much like self-confidence in teaching. And I also I knew that it was something that I would be good at. And it was another way to help people, instead of them like helping people once they got into the hospital, like I would have if I was a nurse. I wanted to get people before they were there, and to ideally help them try to avoid it, because there's so much stress-induced illness that happens to our society, especially in the US. So that's why I started. And then throughout my life, I've had the luxury of getting to teach for some pretty cool brands. I've taught for Red Bull plenty of times, Snapchat, and then retreat centers as well. And my business partner Mackenzie and I are actually hosting a yoga retreat next year in Croatia. So it's teaching in tandem with working in the corporate, I guess, workforce has kept me really grounded. And it's also just like put me in check of like, this is who you are. This is how you approach being and how you approach life. And my interest in the human experience in general applies so much into yoga that I read a lot of Mark Nepo and other books that help inform what I share in class and how vulnerable I am in class. And then I think that human approach to being in class also translates to my approach in how I communicate in business. And so I think I have really quality relationships. I'm able to like really empathize with people that are just going through a rough day and showing up in a meeting. And I think I need both in my life in order to have that balance. And then also to just apply it to my own practice, like having my own meditation practice and my own yoga practice, I think is essential to being a whole human being for me.
Wow. Why has yoga become this woman thing? Why men tend to stray away from a yoga practice?
It's interesting. I think marketing has done yoga like really wrong. I think PR for yoga has been notoriously not been great. And in general, like you see, someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger lifting, and dudes are like, I dig that, I'm gonna lift. And it's the same for yoga. Like there isn't like a heavy male presence, or there is now, but there wasn't always. And then if there was, like Bikram wasn't the greatest example for us. So, I think in the past it has been very female dominated, but now like some of the best practitioners that I know teach yoga, sculpt, bar, and they're men. And I actually really enjoy taking their classes as well, because of their approach to teaching is so different. And how some women have conducted their classes. I think everyone has a really unique perspective, regardless of gender. And I think especially companies like Viore and Lululemon and Beyond Yoga, even like Sia is a surf brand, like it's not necessarily yoga, but I would consider that to be an affinity audience is surfing. Those brands are portraying more like people who identify as men in those shoes as teaching yoga or participating in yoga. So I think more men are getting on board, especially considering that yoga and meditation are really high performance pieces of sport.
Yeah, for sure. And there's such a niche for yoga for men. I'm actually gonna do a bunch of these workouts myself, yoga flow, and post them on my YouTube, because when you search for these type of flows, yoga flows on YouTube, there's like two brands doing it, if not three. So I think there's a very cool niche for men. On my side, I think yes, it's the muscle thing. It's also the discomfort as a man to not be good at one thing, which is flexibility, which requires huge patience. Flexibility, it's like women are more flexible, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure scientifically. And I also think that they're more patient than men. So I really need to get my practice back on track, because to me, yoga is, yeah, including some chemicals that you can get from some type of workout, and yeah, stretching, you have like endorphins that are released, and you can finish with a nice meditation. The meditation is so much better, and there's been so much benefits proven to yoga for focus, concentration, stress management, longevity also, because I mean, if you're not flexible, you'll have like back pains and so forth. So yeah, I really think I'm gonna get like deeper into that, and that also reminded me to restart doing some of my 10 minutes hit that I used to publish on my YouTube. I think that's really cool, like for people that want to work out for free, basically 10, 15 minutes per day, busy professionals. I was doing that before, but I stopped. That being said, like, do you have your own studio, or like plans to open your own yoga place, or just the retreat aspect of it?
Yeah, well, first going back to your last point, I recently read a quote, and I've always talked to students about this, is it's not whether or not you can touch your toes. It's like, it's the journey on the way to touching your toes. That's yoga. Like
Yeah.
putting your foot above your head doesn't matter. Like if you can do that, that's super cool, but it's not, even if you can, if you're not like actively practicing yoga and that comes easy to you, that's not necessarily the good stuff. Like the good stuff happens in the learning, and that's what yoga is. It's not, the cool headstands or the handstands. I don't do handstands, and I've been practicing yoga for like, since I was 15. And it doesn't matter either. Like it's the ego gets in the way of the yoga. And I've seen men who are 10 times more flexible than a lot of women that I've seen in my classes. And that's amazing. And I think that's just because over time, like maybe in certain sports or something, stretching has notoriously been more implemented for women than men. Like, I don't know if people in volleyball are trained to stretch more, and people in like weightlifting maybe aren't. Who knows? I don't work in either of those sports. So I don't know. It's an interesting thing, but people get confused on the yoga piece of that, and like what it is and why they should be doing it. And the first thing that people say is, well, I can't touch my toes. And I'm like, yes, you can. Just like bend over and touch your toes, because everyone can.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, it's not the point. And then as far as where I've been teaching, I am right now currently quite a gypsy. I don't live like in one place. So I don't teach at one studio consistently. I have a lot of classes from COVID on my Instagram, and then some on YouTube on my website. And then I do teach at retreats right now. So I taught in a beautiful retreat center called 12 Senses in Encinitas, and then I'm teaching in Croatia. And then I plan on doing a lot more, depending on where I am for an extended period of time. I'll be in Nicaragua at the end of the year. I'm ideally going to hope to teach there every week. So yeah, it really depends on where I am and where I can build that community and to see if it fits.
How's been that lifestyle for you? I'm a nomad too. Like, why did you decided to live your life that way, and what were the benefits so far?
Yeah, so I only started in January. When we started Sun and Soul, I've been working in one place, whether that has been at one brand that required me to live in Santa Monica, another one that required me to live in Costa Mesa or San Clemente, another one that brought me back to Beverly Hills, and to report to an office every single day. It doesn't allow a whole lot of flexibility to go to France for a summer or to spend a lot more time in Hawaii surfing or whatever that is. And in January, I recently learned the term corporate escapee, and I was like, I am that. So I stopped working for the corporation that I was working for, and I started Sun and Soul. And I was like, well, I'm going to take this opportunity to travel and to see my family. My whole family is mainly in Florida. And go to Hawaii and surf more and just like connect more with myself, because so much of my energy had been placed day to day in one brand or the brands that I was working with. So I traveled around a bit before this year. And then in May, I was invited to a wedding of one of my best friends in Tuscany. And I planned on staying in Europe for a month. My plan was to go, or a month or a little bit more, maybe. It was to go to a certain amount of places. And then I ended up learning that I could have 3 months there. So because of the travel visa. So I took it. And then my plan while I was there was that I was going to come home to Encinitas, which is where technically all my things live, in my best friend's garage. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to get a place there and then figure it out. And then as I was wrapping up my time in Europe, I just had some life things happen. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to get a place. I'm going to keep moving. So there's benefits to it and not benefits. Like, it's definitely sometimes hard to feel grounded. It can be hard to find alone time. And I really value my alone time. But I think there's been a lot more benefits from it, from being able to see my friends more often, to have more quality time with them, to have more autonomy in what I do and where I go, and what hours I work. Like if I have a free 30 minutes, like I did yesterday in between meetings, I went for a surf. So I love having that flexibility and not having to necessarily answer to someone anytime I want to do anything.
Very cool. How obvious was the decision to start Sun and Salt? Tell us about the context.
Yeah, I had been like friends had told me for years that I should start consulting. Because of I'm very independent and I have like a big vision for what's in front of me. I usually like dream a lot. So I started freelancing in I think almost exactly a year ago for a few different brands and while I was working in my corporate setting. And I really loved it because it felt more direct impact or direct to consumer impact. So whether that be educating people on biotechnology and how that's helpful for us as human beings living on Earth, or getting people to connect through journaling with their mental health and helping to elevate their mental health, creating new neural pathways. It just felt like I was actually directly impacting people. I did that at Red Bull for sure. And then I at the other brands that I work with too, but not so much on a granular level. And then in January, I started noticing that I was getting some more clients, having more conversations, and I thought of Mackenzie and how often I wanted to work with her. And I was mid-meeting with a client and I was like, hold on one second. I texted Mac and I was like, can we be business partners? Because I think we would be great at it. And she was like, absolutely, hell yes. When do we start? And it was as easy as that. We were like, what are our company values? What do we care about? What clients align with those values? And we set them and then the clients fell into place. Like one of our biggest values is environmental advocacy. And we just recently we got to work with Protect Our Winters on their Stoke the Vote Stoke Fest tour to get people educated on how to vote in the midterm elections, ideally for the environment. So like things like that have just felt really fulfilling. And it's interesting how Kismet and how amazing like the right clients that we've been wanting to work with have fallen into place.
What's your carbon footprint and how do you offset it?
As a business,
Yeah, and individual.
that's a hard one.
Because both are the same to me. Like I'm a business and the person.
Well, you're a digital business, so your carbon footprint's probably quite small as a business, unless you, if you have a big building that emits a lot of carbon emissions, or if you fly all over the place, there's so many different things that put off, those things that you eventually do want to offset. It's a really complicated and long conversation, I would say. But what I'll say on that is the most important thing to remember as someone who wants to advocate on behalf of the environment is that it'll never be perfect, and being an imperfect advocate is okay as long as you're doing something. So if you're, it's not reduce, reuse, recycle, it's like reduce, reuse. Like think of that, and then keeping everything that you have, because you don't necessarily know that your recycling is being recycled. You don't know, even if it says it's being recycled, where it's going. And also like purchasing carbon offsets hasn't necessarily been a great solution, because we actually, I think a lot of the traceability behind that isn't totally there. So like you can say, I'm purchasing a carbon offset and it's someone standing in front of a lot of trees. It's like, fine, I won't cut them down. So, and it's like, that's not great. That's not how you actually offset. I would say like as an individual, if you want to contribute to the environment, and the betterment of it is to like use the power of your individual right to vote, as well as just doing everything that you can to stay informed, educated, do the things that the people say to do, but also know that it doesn't need to be extreme. It's never going to be perfect, and that anything that you do matters.
Very cool. One of your main values is authenticity. How do you make sure that your clients also share this same value?
Authenticity?
Yeah.
We call them on it. We in the past have had a client that has purchased followers, and that we were like, we're starting over. Like that's bots don't purchase what you're selling. They don't purchase anything. And that's not how you build community. It's not the right way. It's not even a metric. The follower metric doesn't matter. It's not, if you don't have an engaged community, you don't have a community. You have bots. And so I think that's something that we're not shy about communicating with our clients about, because we've had a lot of really valuable experience in trying to maintain authenticity through different forms and mediums of storytelling. And we can tell when our client is straying away from that. But I will also say that, like, any client that we've met, for the most part, we knew personally. And so it's been quite easy to not run into any inauthenticity, because for the most part, if we're friends, like, we understand how important authenticity is. But there has been instances where there has been inauthentic suggestions where we've been like, hey, does that really align with our goal and our vision and our dreams? And usually they're like, oh yeah, no. And it's like, well, other people are doing it. Are we sure that we shouldn't be? And it's like, repeat the question to yourself. And so it's just like a really good way of having to, like, just remind people that it's just pixels on a screen. And if you're contributing to something that's inauthentic to pixels on a screen and you're complaining about spending all the time doing it, then that's probably not the right thing to do. So yeah, it hasn't been an overly challenging thing. It's just been a fun learning, I think, on both sides, is always like keeping ourselves in check and making sure that we're communicating with the right people and making actual real human connections, being social, not just being on social.
So good. Well, thank you for all the knowledge you've shared. That's been amazing. 30 minutes of value bombs, Rachel. So where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, for sure. My website is rachaelbischoff.com. We might have to write that down because it's my parents didn't spell it the traditional way. And then I'm on Instagram, and my agency is sunandsoulco.agency. Instagram is sunandsoulco_, I believe. So yeah, that's me. And then my business partner is Mackenzie Perna, and I can share her information as well.